The night Rome's brides began to fear their wedding veils, the Tiber ran silent, as if the river itself refused to witness what was coming. It was 37 CE, and a new ruler sat upon the imperial throne, Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, the man history would come to call Caligula. His reign began with jubilation, a chorus of freed prisoners and forgiven debts. But within months, the same hands that raised garlands in celebration would tremble in terror. For Caligula, the emperor who could command life and death with a nod, soon discovered he could command something more intoxicating: love, or rather, the illusion of it. When Caligula seized the throne, Rome expected another Caesar, a man of governance and glory. Instead, it found a tyrant obsessed with possession of bodies, of hearts, of symbols. Marriage, once Rome's holiest institution, became his plaything. The emperor's word could now nullify betrothals, rewrite vows, and unmake homes. In the empire that had conquered nations, one man began conquering wives, and he called it law. Witnesses spoke of ceremonies halted mid-ritual. A nobleman's bride, dressed in white and trembling, saw the temple doors swing open, imperial guards flooding the chamber, declaring her union invalid by decree of Caesar himself. The priest froze, the groom collapsed, and the bride was taken to the palace, where Caligula awaited her, not as a ruler, but as a usurper of sanctity. Each act was justified under the thin veil of divine right, a phrase Caligula used as his crown of immunity. To challenge him was blasphemy. To resist him was treason. Did you know Caligula once interrupted the wedding of Gaius Piso, a prominent senator, to claim the bride for himself? Historical accounts describe him walking into the celebration, smiling with theatrical charm, before announcing that the gods had changed their will, that this woman, now and forever, belonged to Caesar. Piso's guests dared not speak. The bride, Livia Orestilla, was taken that same evening to the imperial bedchamber, and within days declared Empress of Rome. But by the next month, she was discarded, replaced as casually as a coin tossed into the fountain. The punishment for Piso's silent rage came later, when Caligula ordered his exile for conspiring against the purity of imperial marriage. What had begun as personal indulgence soon turned into a ritual of dominance. In Caligula's Rome, desire was no longer private. It was a decree. His ministers drew up documents allowing him to reclaim any woman of noble birth for imperial purposes. It became known in whispers as the bridal edict, a perversion of law that allowed the emperor to turn engagement into fear. Families destroyed evidence of upcoming unions. Fathers sent their daughters away in secret, claiming illness or mourning, anything to keep them hidden from the emperor's notice. Inside the Palatine Palace, where marble walls once echoed with senatorial debate, a new kind of silence took hold, the silence of wives waiting to be chosen. Caligula's spies, dressed as servants and attendants, reported every beauty seen at banquets and festivals. Lists were made. Names were recited to the emperor like offerings. He would pause over one or another, smiling faintly, and mark them with a gesture, a fate sealed without a word spoken. One witness, the historian Suetonius, claimed Caligula treated the sanctity of marriage as a jest. During one feast, he reportedly demanded that every married senator present surrender his wife to the imperial table so that Caesar might test her virtue. The hall erupted in nervous laughter, the kind of laughter born of survival. And when Caligula stood and walked among them, touching a shoulder here, lifting a veil there, the sound died entirely. By morning, several women had vanished. By the next evening, jewels were delivered to their husbands, a cruel token of what had been taken. Rome, a city once ruled by law, was now ruled by appetite, and appetite has no code, no logic, no boundary. Even the gods seemed to shrink under Caligula's will. He declared himself the living Jupiter, and from that moment, every act of desire became divine. To question his choices was to defy heaven itself. In this theater of obedience, the senators clapped, the priests nodded, and the city bled its dignity in silence. There was one night that became legend, the wedding of Julia Livilla, Caligula's own sister. The imperial family had gathered in golden splendor, musicians playing hymns of Venus. But when the bride turned her gaze toward the emperor, something in his eyes froze her in place. The next morning, Rome awoke to a decree, the marriage annulled, the groom executed, and Livilla brought into the palace under the name Consort of Jupiter. Rumors spread that Caligula had performed a mock ceremony before the statue of the god himself, declaring that only the divine could share his bloodline. It was no longer about lust, it was theology reimagined through madness. But the terror was not confined to marble halls. In the Subura, the crowded heart of Rome, common women whispered that their weddings might be cursed if they spoke the emperor's name aloud. Bakers refused to prepare wedding cakes during certain festivals, claiming the goddess Juno's temple had fallen silent. The entire city felt infected by the emperor's desires, a sickness of morality that spread faster than any plague. Caligula's own guards began to fear the invitations to palace feasts. They knew too well that such evenings could end in public humiliation. A wife seated beside the emperor, praised for her beauty, then led away before dawn under pretense of divine consultation. To protest was to die, and so they smiled, toasted, and looked away. Behind closed doors, Caligula's new brides lived brief, gilded nightmares. Their chambers smelled of wine and fear. They were paraded through corridors lined with statues of goddesses, each one a reminder of what they were supposed to embody, yet never could. Some survived only a few nights before being replaced. Others were kept as tokens, adorned with jewels looted from temples. One former bride, unnamed by history, was reportedly found wandering the palace gardens in silence, her hair cut short, murmuring prayers to Mercury, the god of escape. Historians still debate whether Caligula's decrees were law in the legal sense or simply terror masquerading as authority. But the result was the same: the erasure of agency. Marriage, once a pillar of Roman society, collapsed under the weight of one man's obsession. The Senate, humiliated, dared not confront him. When they finally tried, Caligula retaliated with spectacle, appearing at public games dressed as a bride himself, declaring that all Rome is my husband. The crowd, trapped between disbelief and fear, cheered. It was the loudest silence in the city's history. By the end of his short reign, Caligula had redefined what it meant to rule, not by justice, not by might, but by violation. He proved that the most effective weapon of empire was not the sword, but the decree, a single word that could unmake lives. And as the sun set over the Palatine that final winter, the bells of Rome's temples rang hollow, echoing a truth no one dared to speak aloud. When the emperor could seize your bride, he had already conquered your soul. By the second year of Caligula's reign, the empire had forgotten the sound of dignity. What began as spectacle had become system, an empire of humiliation draped in marble. Rome's nobility lived like hostages in their own homes, where laughter was rehearsed, loyalty performed, and marriage recited as an oath to the emperor not to love. Caligula's lust was no longer a whisper in dark corridors. It was a proclamation, carved into decree and executed by men in uniform. Rome's code of honor, once the backbone of its society, had been twisted into a mirror reflecting only one man's pleasure. Every noble family knew the ritual. When an imperial messenger appeared at the door, carrying the white seal of the Caesar, there was no need to open the letter. It meant one thing: the emperor's invitation. Refusal was impossible. Silence was interpreted as rebellion. Inside, the letter spoke of divine selection, a phrase that meant a daughter or a wife was to be taken to the palace, adorned, and prepared for service. And so began the nightly processions of despair. Guarded chariots moving through Rome's streets under torchlight, each carrying a woman whose name would soon vanish from her family's records. The ruin of honor began with fear, but it ended with complicity. Senators competed to offer their wives as gestures of loyalty. Fathers boasted that their daughters had been chosen by the divine eye. Even the poets joined in, composing hymns to Caligula's supposed union with the goddess Venus. But beneath the golden praise was rot, a city pretending that corruption was blessing. Rome's upper class became both victims and accomplices, reshaping their morality to survive. One chilling story survives from those days: the tale of Marcus Lepidus, a young nobleman whose bride, Cornelia, had been taken to the palace under Caligula's decree. In a desperate attempt to preserve his wife's name, Lepidus disguised himself as a servant and followed her carriage to the gates of the Palatine. He was caught within hours. Caligula, amused by the act, ordered Lepidus to attend the feast, where Cornelia was presented as the emperor's new consort. Before the gathered court, Caligula forced Lepidus to pour wine for his wife, a ceremony of humiliation disguised as civility. By dawn, Lepidus was gone, executed for disrespecting imperial sanctity. Cornelia, sources say, never spoke again. This was how the emperor broke men, not by the sword, but by shame. Honor, the one virtue Romans prized above all, became a weapon. To defy him was to die dishonored. To obey him was to live in disgrace. Even the old generals, once proud defenders of Rome's frontiers, bowed their heads and kissed the emperor's hand as he paraded their wives before them like trophies of conquest. Caligula had found the perfect formula for tyranny: make virtue impossible, and no one can claim to be righteous. But even tyranny has its cracks, and in those cracks, vengeance began to grow. Inside the Senate, whispers turned to plans. Men who had once toasted Caligula's name now plotted his silence. One of his closest guards, Cassius Chaerea, was among them, a veteran mocked by the emperor for his soft voice and delicate gestures. Caligula often ordered him to deliver obscene commands in public, forcing him to repeat words of lust before the crowd. Each humiliation carved a wound, and every wound, in time, began to fester into hatred. Meanwhile, the city's women bore their own quiet rebellion. Some carved symbols of Juno, goddess of marriage, into the undersides of temple walls, marking prayers for deliverance. Others refused to speak the emperor's name, believing that silence could strip him of power. One anonymous letter, found centuries later among the ruins, read, "He takes our brides, but not our gods." That single line captures the defiance of an empire brought to its knees, but not yet spiritually conquered. The moral decay spread beyond the palace. When the emperor's example became law, the city followed suit. Wealthy men began to trade wives in mock imitation of Caligula's divine exchanges. Marriages became contracts of convenience, and love turned into a luxury for the powerless. Slave markets flourished as noble families sought to distract themselves with new indulgences. Even the temples of Venus and Juno, once sacred sanctuaries, became dens of bribery, where priests accepted offerings to protect brides from imperial attention. The empire's faith itself was for sale. Yet amid the corruption, the emperor's paranoia grew. Caligula began to suspect that his own decrees had birthed hatred too deep to control. He doubled his guards, ordered the execution of senators on flimsy charges, and even turned his wrath toward his own sisters, accusing them of betrayal. The man who had claimed divine power now feared mortal revenge. He built secret passageways beneath the palace, believing assassins waited behind every column. And still, he issued new edicts, forcing couples to separate, demanding that brides of his choice be brought before him to honor the empire. One evening, at a lavish banquet meant to celebrate his divine marriage to the goddess Luna, Caligula commanded that all married couples present exchange partners as a test of loyalty. The guests froze. To refuse was treason. To comply was humiliation beyond measure. Under the torchlight, nobles handed their wives to strangers as the emperor laughed and raised a cup of wine. "See," he declared, "Rome obeys her God." That night became legend, the night the word honor died in Rome. But destiny has a way of avenging the humiliated. In 41 CE, the same marble corridors that had echoed with screams of stolen brides now heard the shuffle of conspirators. As Caligula prepared for another morning of decrees and games, Cherea and his fellow guards struck. The emperor, who believed himself untouchable, fell beneath the blades of the very men he had mocked. His final words, historians say, were disbelief, not fear, but astonishment that divinity could bleed. In the aftermath, Rome's nobles reclaimed their homes, their daughters, their names. Yet something vital had been lost. The Senate erased his decrees, the statues were smashed, but the memory remained that even the greatest civilization could be corrupted not by invasion, but by obedience. The fear lingered like a ghost in every wedding that followed, in every vow whispered before the gods. Caligula's downfall restored the republic's breath, but it could not restore its innocence. The empire had looked too long into the eyes of its own depravity, and the reflection could never be unseen. Rome learned, too late, that the ruin of honor begins not when tyrants rise, but when the honorable choose silence. And as the centuries passed, storytellers would return to that era with the same haunted question. What is power if it can turn love into law? History's answer, written in blood upon the stones of the Palatine, still echoes. When an emperor can claim a man's bride, no empire remains unbroken.